Okay, I have a lot to say about this one. When you just throw things at the wall and just hope something will work, every time it doesn't work, they internalize that as their own failure. So a really good goal is going to have data, it's going to have numbers, it's going to be very specific. I usually tell parents when they come to me, you have to make a decision right now. If you want me to get involved, you have to make a decision. Do you want to be that parent, or do you want to just get services outside of the school? If you are just going to go into this meeting and not want to hurt anyone's feelings, and not want to hold anyone accountable, then you are just going to get rolled right over.
I am so pleased to be joined by Dr. Kelli Sandman-Hurley, who is a co-founder of the Dyslexia Training Institute and has spent over 2 decades specializing in dyslexia intervention and advocacy. Kelli has extensively studied structured word inquiry and the Orton-Gillingham approach. She co-created and produced Dyslexia for a Day, which is a simulation of dyslexia, as well as writing multiple well-received books, Dyslexia Advocate, which we're going to talk about today, and some other books, The Dyslexia and Spelling, Making Sense of It All, and the adult side of dyslexia. Having an expert like you to answer all our questions is so valuable. In your book, it's jam full of valuable content. I would say even just the glossary alone of the terms and the appendix of all the IDA regulations were incredibly useful, and you're very careful about your terminology, which I appreciated. On that note of being careful about terminology, so that parents have sort of a framework in their mind to understand everything else we talk about. Not everyone understands that dyslexia is varied and occurs on a continuum, but there are different types of deficits that are helpful to understand that they can be different depending on the child. So can you explain those deficits, like the phonological understanding, rapid naming, orthographic processing, in terms that we as parents can understand?
Sure, I can try. So you were right that dyslexia occurs on a continuum of mild, moderate, severe to profound. And so the most basic definition of dyslexia is that it's a phonological deficit that makes it difficult to read and spell, and sometimes affects and impacts reading comprehension. Within that definition is the phonological processing. So that is the student's ability to be able to manipulate the language. So can they take apart a word if it's spoken to them? And then the orthographic part is, can they look at a word that's written on paper and then be able to read its word parts, either if it's morphemes or syllables, quickly enough to be able to process it in order to read that word and move on and gain comprehension from the text. And then you've got that, when you're on that continuum, the mild, moderate, severe to profound, you can have students who just struggle with fluency, and you can have students all the way up to the profound side who struggle reading single syllable words and everything in between.
Okay. So when it's just fluency, is that more the rapid naming type deficit?
Well, rapid naming, if you have dyslexia, and you have phonological processing deficits and rapid naming deficits, that's called double deficit dyslexia. So that makes it extra difficult for you to be able to comprehend what you're reading, and at a speed that makes it easier for you to be able to comprehend what you're reading and keep moving on. So you just have a lot more difficult accessing that information in a timely manner, in a way that we need in order to be able to read. So it's just, the fluency could be rapid naming, but it might also just be difficulty with decoding that's slowing you down. And that's why you have to have an assessment to figure out what it is.
When my daughter was diagnosed, I don't think that the psychologist did explain the different types of deficits. So it's dyslexia. And then you go on the internet, and it's just all of this stuff. And so it's
so
hard.
much.
It's helpful to know where to focus your attention and where to focus your child's resources. And then how does short-term memory interact with that? Does that amplify the deficits, or is that part of it?
Well, again, that's where you really need a good assessment. So an assessment will determine whether or not there is a short-term memory deficit, and then how that impacts the reading. So it
Okay.
could impact how long you can hold information in your brain long enough to be able to comprehend what you're reading, or it might not. So that's what I mean. If you're a parent and you're worried about your child's reading and spelling, you really have to have that comprehensive evaluation in order to know how to move forward, because you have to figure out what the weaknesses are, because everyone with dyslexia looks different. They all have different strengths and weaknesses. So whatever worked for your neighbor might not work for you. So you really have to have that individual assessment.
That's so helpful. I really think these different types of strengths and weaknesses are important to understand when advocating for your child. So, the part about the difficulty of processing and storing language that makes it harder to assess the word, so that's related to the memory part. What is it like? What should parents look for? Maybe who haven't had that assessment yet, or maybe thinking their child could have dyslexia, like what are sort of the signs that they could notice at home in order to sort of start this journey?
So especially for parents who it's their first child, or their first child who's usually their first child or their only child, because you don't really have anything to compare it to. And I am the
Exactly.
parent of an only child. He doesn't have dyslexia, but I do find it difficult to know what's normal because I only have one. So I'm constantly asking people around me, is this normal? Do all of your kids do this? But you want to look for the unexpected part. So do they have an average to above average intelligence, and are they struggling with the reading but not struggling in other areas? Do they seem to Sally Shaywitz calls it a weakness in a sea of strengths. So are they really good at everything, and then when it comes to language and reading and anything written, then they struggle? That is a huge red flag. The other red flag is, did you struggle, or does anybody in your family struggle? And then that isn't always the case, but that is another thing to look for. But just look for that weakness that just doesn't seem to fit. Like, why,
Hmm.
there's no intellectual disability here. There's no other huge factors that you could point to that would make reading difficult for them. That's the red flag.
Okay, that's really helpful. I appreciate how you explain these things in such an approachable way.
Thank you. I had a little coffee today too, so like, let's go.
Well, great. I have a lot of questions. Okay, so let's talk about the advocating part.
Okay.
Many schools want to wait and see,
Hmm.
or let's give this a try. And I've heard that. And walk us through why that's so harmful for the child.
Okay, I have a lot to say about this one. So I want to preface this by saying I came from the adult literacy world. Before my former business partner, who's now retired, before we started Dyslexia Training Institute, we both worked at Reed San Diego, which was the adult literacy program in the San Diego Public Library. And so what that means is that we worked with adults who were low literate I was there for over 12 years. And so, when you talk to people for that long about how literacy has impacted them over their life, you realize that waiting is the worst thing you can do. Because if you are in fourth grade and you've been struggling since kindergarten, you've been struggling. You may not be able to
Hmm.
verbalize it in a way that adults can understand, but you know that you're behind your peers. And
Hmm.
on top of that, your peers know that you're behind, especially if you've been at the same school the whole time and you all start to know each other. When I wrote a book called The Adult Side of Dyslexia, and I interviewed all of the adults. I asked them all the same questions, and they all told me stories about feeling isolated and feeling like they didn't have a voice, not understanding why they weren't reading and spelling. Nobody was talking to them about it. And when you just throw things at the wall and just hope something will work, they just internalize it. Every time it doesn't work, they internalize that as their own failure. Because we're the experts, we're the parents, we're the ones who are supposed to know what to do. And when we present something to them, say, "Oh, this is going to work. This is what you need," and then it doesn't work, it's just like, "Well, I'm just stupid. I can't do this." And so, you know, the other side of that is the physical part. So, if we're waiting till fourth or fifth grade, we're also missing an opportunity as far as brain plasticity goes to be able to learn it quicker. So as somebody who was in the adult literacy world, I know how hard it is as you get older to learn something new. So if we really identify it as early as possible, hopefully kindergarten, then they'll get the intervention they need, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and then never maybe even have to be in special education. So I
Hmm.
mean, there's a lot of answers to that question, but they really do start to feel isolated, especially now if you're going into middle school, high school. Then you're really talking about some social emotional issues that can pop up, especially for
Yeah.
your twice exceptional kids who have an above average intelligence and they're struggling. That's when they really start to internalize all the difficulty.
I bet. And those are probably the students that kind of flew under the radar and
Yes.
weren't diagnosed early on. That's a
Yes.
really good point. Okay, so you mentioned that maybe if they get the instruction in kindergarten first, second, they might not have to go into special ed. Talk to me about, many schools have the multi-tiered support system or response to intervention programs. And by the time my daughter was in fourth grade, I realized that the multi-tiered support program we had at our school was, at least in my mind, better because the teacher was trained in Orton Gillingham and my daughter's special ed teachers were not trained in Orton Gillingham, or it seemed to
Hmm.
me like anything related to dyslexia. So, can you talk more about kind of how parents should be thinking about this? Like, is it if they're in kindergarten, just it's okay to maybe let them do the multi-tiered support for a while? How should we be thinking about that?
That's a really tough question because it's so individualized. Um, I would say in kindergarten, it's probably okay to just let the teacher do their thing while keeping a close eye on it. Once you hit first, second grade, then the thing is you have to have an identification. You have to know what the weaknesses are. So
Hmm.
if you know they're struggling, but you don't know why they're struggling, it's going to be kind of hard. It's going to be hard to figure out what to do. So that's when, a lot of states now are doing screeners. So hopefully the
Hmm.
screeners will help. Then, then you have the screening and then what? So
Yeah.
they're identified and now what? Now who do you have that's trained to help the students who popped up as needing help from the screeners? I think it's just, that's like I said, you just really have to have that evaluation in order to be able to go to the school and say, this is where their weaknesses are and this is what they need. And we do need a teacher who's trained in this, this, and this. But that's also difficult because IDEA doesn't really set it up where we're allowed to go in and ask for something specific. So,
Hmm.
you really have to have all the data that you can in order to go in and say, this is the evidence that he or she needs this particular type of program. But you can't just have the program, the teacher has to be trained in it. So it's not just here's the program and everything's going to be great. It's like, no, what training did the teacher have? Do they know when to move forward? Do they know when to go back? Do they know how to do progress monitoring? Do they know why they're doing this? Do they know how the English language works? So we have to ask all those questions as well. It's difficult. It's really hard.
It is. Yeah, I think you said in the book that the curriculum is only half the battle
Right.
and the training of the person implementing is probably more important. And I completely agree with that. So how can parents assess like whether their teacher has the adequate training?
Well, you can just straight up ask them. Or, a lot of times they'll say, okay, we're going to use this curriculum. And then I'll say, that's great. And then I'll look at the curriculum and I'll call the curriculum developer and say, what kind of training does a teacher need in order to implement this curriculum?
Oh, that's
And
good.
then find out. Oh, the other side of that is curriculum developers have gotten really savvy. So now they'll say, this is based on the science of reading. This is based in structured literacy, but they don't provide a lot of teacher training.
Hmm.
There is one really big program out there who just gives lots of really great structured literacy activities for free, but they don't do a lot of teacher training. And
Mm.
as a program where we certify people in Orton Gillingham, and we offer a practicum. We know that you need a practicum because a lot of teachers really need that coaching in order to know how to do it correctly. So I know that kind of answered your question, but I mean, you can ask them. Some people can get really defensive. Schools don't really have to do anything other than say they're credentialed, but you can, like I said, go back and use the training that the curriculum developers require.
That's great. And I think data just, I mean, that's a black and white thing. If the curriculum person provided it, once you start getting outside of black and white data, it's difficult to advocate, I've found.
It is.
So if a parent does discover that the teacher doesn't have the appropriate training, what do you do then?
That's where it gets really, really difficult. So I wanted to add too, is that you can also do an observation. So you can have an advocate go in. I wouldn't suggest a parent do this, but have an advocate or somebody go in and observe the student with the teacher to see if what they're doing is appropriate. So make sure whoever does the observation is somebody who also knows what's appropriate. That's when you really have really difficult IEP meetings. And that's where you might say, well, and this is really where you do have to have an IEP because they have to be held accountable to the goals that were in the IEP. So if the
Mm-hmm.
student isn't meeting those goals, then you can say, well, why aren't they meeting those goals? And if one of the reasons they're not meeting the goals is because the teacher isn't trained, then you can have a conversation about outside services or compensatory education. But now we're really getting into an area where you might want to consult an attorney.
Okay. That's helpful to know.
Yeah.
And you're right. I in all of the meetings, it seems like they always like tying things back to the goals. So you're sort
Yes.
of using that not against them, but as a major point that
That's
everyone
what
agrees on.
Yeah, and that's why they're so important. The goals are the heart of the IEP. So you have
Mm-hmm.
the needs to drive goals, and the goals drive the services. So, I always write these goals that can only be accomplished if you're using something that's appropriate. And so if it's
Mm-hmm.
not appropriate, it's going to show up in the goals. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, we have to wait, and there's a person involved here. And I think that gets forgotten too.
So what is a good amount of time to wait? Like if it's the beginning of the year and it's a new teacher, for example, that's not a for example. That has been my experience in the past. I've had an experience where I just had a bad feeling from the beginning, but I didn't have enough data to back up my bad feeling. So, how long do you wait to give them a chance to make progress?
That's a really good question. So I'm finding that a lot of people aren't even getting progress reports. So at every reporting period, you should be getting a progress report. And so every time grades come out, you should also get a progress report from the teacher about the progress on goals. So, I would wait, and I try to give the teacher some grace and say, you have to build rapport. You have to figure out the student, where they are and what works for them, what doesn't work for them. I would say, I hate to say this because I hate people waiting, but, 2 progress reports. And then if there's very little minimal progress, then have another
Hmm.
IEP meeting and talk about why.
Okay,
But
that
the
makes
problem is
sense.
that, kids grow up so fast. So we're talking about
Yeah,
like third grade. Now they're halfway through third grade, and then we're talking about it again. We're going to change again. And then, it's just, it goes by so quickly. And so it's hard to put a number on it.
it is. And from my experience as a parent, um, learning this process as I go, and I had a huge benefit of my mom having been a special ed teacher for
Oh, okay.
decades. And so even with her, helping me through this and like you said, they weren't giving me progress reports. I had no idea that I was supposed to get them. And she was just appalled at every turn this school took. And if I didn't know what the norm was, I wouldn't even know what I was missing out on. But you're right. Yeah, you wait the 2 periods, and then they try something new, and then you're supposed to wait some more, all the while you're learning and time is going by, and like you said, you're missing out. Meanwhile, your child's scores are that gap is getting bigger and bigger. So it is a balance to get that timing right. Let's talk more about the goals. Like what makes an effective goal? What's sort of the difference between like a weak and a strong goal that actually drives progress?
I'm laughing because someone just sent me 2 goals that I literally I read it in the text message and I just put my phone down. And I was like, I just can't. So a really good goal is going to have data. It's going to have numbers. It's going to be very specific. So for example, it'll be a set number of words they will be able to read on their own by a certain amount of time. And then it'll be a certain type of word. So if you're using structured literacy, you might have a goal that says they're going to be able to read closed and open syllables, 20 closed and open syllables with 85 to 90% accuracy by this time. And then you'll have another goal for spelling. And so every need they have, there'll be a goal for that need. So we
Mhm.
don't want to have goals with everything jam-packed into that one goal. And so in IEP meetings, I do get pushback because I tend to write a lot of goals. But my philosophy behind that is that if you're using the appropriate program, you will be teaching all those goals at the same time. You'll just be assessing them separately. So a lot of
Mhm.
teachers will see all my goals and say, I just don't have the time for that. And I understand. I understand that the teachers are totally overworked. I totally get it. Unfortunately, my job is just for that one child that's sitting there. But I do explain to them that if you're using the appropriate thing, you just have to assess them separately. What isn't appropriate are opinions or really things that are really vague. I think the one I
Mhm.
read was something like they will improve their reading comprehension by the end of the year. And I'm not even exaggerating. It was something like that. And there's no, there's no words per minute, there's no grade level, there's no what type of reading, is it narrative, is it expository? There's nothing like that. They need to be very specific and they need to be very needs driven. So you have to
Mhm.
into the needs area, go into the assessment, and then write goals based on those needs that are in there. And then you can develop the services from the goals.
And I think too, go in knowing what you're going to ask for the goals, have those prepared. I walked into a meeting and they said, "Okay, what goals do you want?" And I'm like, well, what is a goal?
Yes.
Um, and then they were sort of suggesting things, and I'm like, I guess that sounds good. Um, it's a lot to educate yourself on as a parent.
That's why
Um,
I really suggest that you don't go alone. If you can, I don't know if you did or not, but if you can get an advocate, please get one. If you can, bring your neighbor or your partner or just someone to sit with you so that you have somebody to help you through the process, or else they are just going to throw jargon at you. And I just listened to a friend's IEP and they were telling, I was just listening to the recording and I wasn't there. And they were telling her all of these things that just weren't true. And she didn't know. So, she didn't have anybody there to help her. And it's not okay.
it's not okay, and yeah, and it can be really intimidating. There was one time my husband did always come to all of the meetings, more for emotional
Yeah.
support.
Well, that's fine.
Uh,
That's good.
and there was, of course, one day. It was the January. It was after two, progress reports of no progress. It was that January meeting we asked for, because this was a big issue. And of course, my daughter was sick that day. And so he had to stay home with her. And I'll never forget walking into that meeting by myself. I was lucky enough to have my mom on the phone, but just walking into that long table of
Hmm.
people, they had stacked the whole room because I think they had figured out at that point that I was pretty, I don't know what to say,
You're
serious.
educating yourself.
Right. So, how do you stay diplomatic and assertive when you're dealing with, frankly, incompetence and this imbalance of a power dynamic? It can be maddening, and as you say, these things can run in families. I think about that all the
Hmm.
time. So, you might have somebody with poor language skills in a maddening situation, which only stresses those skills. It's really difficult.
It is. And when you paint the picture of walking to a room with a long table, I've I've done that so many times. I remember the first time I did that and there was, I mean, literally 12 to 15 people at this table. And they had clearly, and I was like one of my first advocacy jobs. I was there with the parents. They had clearly met before we got there, and that was obvious. And that was a little frustrating because it should be a team meeting. And then they left the three chairs at the end right by the door. And then I always think that sometimes they make the room really hot or really cold. I'm like, do they do that on purpose? I wonder. But I think to answer your question about how do you stay assertive and diplomatic and try to get things done, it's hard because that's a really intimidating scenario. But just, I think being prepared is the best way to do it. Have all of your questions, have your agenda, say this. If your child has dyslexia, you've got really good evidence that they do, just keep saying it. Don't let people say that you can't say it. Use some terminology that you really internalize and that don't just throw things out there
Mhm.
that you don't know, but, really educate yourself about your rights and then use that language so that they know that you know what you're talking about. Make sure that you're recording the meeting. You should record every meeting. Don't look at that as an adversarial way to attend a meeting. Just, if they say, well, why do you want to do that? First of all, you don't have to tell them. But second of all, you can just say, look, I just get really emotional. It's hard for me to remember everything. I would like to go over it again later with my partner or my mom or whoever it is. But, you can make it so it's not because I want to have a gotcha moment or anything like that.
Right.
You can ask very assertive questions without being aggressive. And I think that's really important, especially for classroom teachers. I rarely ask my assertive questions to the teachers because I know they're already overwhelmed. And I'd wish they'd speak up more because I think they know more than anybody else about your child, and they don't speak up as much as I would like them to. So I really try to address the tough questions to the people in the room who can make the decisions, like the administrators and the principals. I think that's really important. It's also important to save that relationship between you and the teacher. so
Mhm.
that, you can still talk to that teacher openly and they know that you're not going to come after them in a meeting. Really important. I went to one IEP meeting when I was mentoring and learning how to do all of this for a student, and the advocate was very aggressive and loud, and he made the teacher cry, and I'll never forget it. And she was probably like 25, 26, and I was so uncomfortable. I'm like, this isn't the advocate I want to be. But I can still be extremely assertive. You just have to ask the questions and know what you're talking about, have the data behind you. Just make sure you're not throwing crazy things out there without having, the evidence to support what you're saying. Sorry,
That's
I have a
great
lot to say
advice.
about that. Such hard meetings.
I agree with you. I took that same approach. I don't direct most things toward the teacher because I agree she seems so overwhelmed
So overwhelmed.
and not well supported. And I know she's not well supported. She knows she's not well supported. And I agree with you. She, is maybe being careful in front of the principal who is her
Hmm.
boss. And I found that I agree. I wish she spoke up more as well because I think it would benefit everybody, but I understand and I want her to get more support. That's part of what I'm fighting for.
Right.
And I think you said in your book too, you're not just there for the child you're advocating for, you're there hopefully to help everybody in that
Yes.
classroom.
Yes, you're educating the whole team because
Right.
a lot of people there don't even understand dyslexia. But you also have to
Right.
have an open team to be able to do that. Some people will just they don't want to hear anything about it.
One thing you said in your book that I smiled at was that you recommend getting a binder in right in kindergarten when this whole thing started with my daughter. That's what my mom advised me to do. And I'm like, Mom, it's a modern world. I got a digital folder on my computer. I'm good. And then towards it, as years went on, I was realizing she was right. And it is so valuable to come in with that physical binder in
Yes.
a in-person meeting. So can you talk more about that?
So there's a couple reasons. First of all, you want to be really organized. So you want to make sure that, if they're saying something that isn't right, you can go right to that page. Make sure it's in chronological order. When you're recording the meetings, which I hope everybody who is listening is recording the meeting, don't let anybody tell you can't. Make sure you check your state laws about how you have to let them know ahead of time. If you have to let them know ahead of time in California, we have to let them know 24 hours ahead that we're going to be recording. Don't do
Mhm.
it in secret. Don't do that. But you're going to transcribe all your meetings. So I use a program online. There's really lots of programs to transcribe recordings. And then make sure you have those because those have been great because I can highlight everything. And if they say, well, we didn't say that, I'm like, well, it's right here. You did say that. And then put a picture of your student in the front. And this is a piece of advice I got from another advocate who a long time ago. So it's not my idea, but she said, put a picture in front. So you have one of those binders that has like the thing in the front, the pocket in the
Right.
front. And then, kind of put it on the table so everyone knows who you're actually talking about. Because I have
Mm.
definitely been in IEP meetings where the principal is talking about how great your kid is, and they're not really even sure who your kid is. Especially if you have, a really big school and, maybe they're a new principal. It could be lots of different reasons. And it's also to
Mhm.
remind everyone that you're talking about a human being. This is a person who's going to school every single day and struggling. So this isn't,
Mhm.
I know this is your fifth IEP meeting today. I know it's a drag, but there's still a person here. And this is
Mhm.
my person. And we're going to make sure that we remember them. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Cause yeah, you can look at data all day long, but you need to remember this is a person,
Yeah. It's a person
child
who's struggling.
struggling.
They're going to be an adult one day recounting to somebody like me how horrible school was. And we want to be able to prevent that.
Yes, that's so true. I have a question about the goals. What do you do if you suspect the goal progress data is being fudged?
Ugh.
That's not hypothetical.
No, it's not. That's where you ask for the evidence. So in a goal, it should say something like 3 out of 5 tries or 3 out of 5 times. So when they say, oh, this goal has been met, and then they want to move on and say, I would like to see the evidence for that goal. And they have to give you the evidence. And when you look at the evidence, make sure it's not the 3 dates before the IEP meeting, which happens a lot. So it needs to be over time because you want to see that from the date we made the goal to whenever this meeting is. I want to know that you kept progress over time. So it needs to be
Mhm.
dated. You need to show it to me. You can't just say it's been in met and move on. That's just not going to happen.
Mhm. For to be more even more specific, like a writing passage,
Hmm.
it shouldn't be their 10th
No,
draft
nope.
that the teacher like spelled out what to
Right.
write. Yeah.
And I ask them that. So how much help did they get? Which draft is this? I want actually, if it's a writing thing too, I would like it not to be typed. I would like it to be written, unless they have dysgraphia and they're using some kind of accommodation. That's fine, but no help, because the point of a goal is what can they do independently. It's not what
Mhm.
can they do with help. And so I don't want to see what they did with help. I need to see what they do on their own, because if they can't do it on their own, then they haven't met the goal,
Exactly. Yeah. And it's funny how you have to spell that out,
right? I
but
know.
it's true. And then kind of going back to how the teachers are so overwhelmed, how do you handle it when a teacher has 6 kids and they have a significant spectrum of different strengths and weaknesses, and she or he is supposed to be helping all of them? I mean, when you realize that that's happening, what should you do as a parent?
That's also a tough one, because we don't have a lot of power over how they deliver the services. The first thing I usually do is do an observation. So I'll do an observation of the group, and I've actually done observations where I've kept track of how many minutes the student I was advocating for was actually getting direct instruction. And
Mm-hmm.
it was not a lot. And it wasn't the teacher's fault. It's what she's given, he or she is given. And so it's really difficult. I would just ask lots of questions in an IEP meeting about that situation, because you're recording the meeting. So
Mm.
that's a point at where I would just pepper them with tons of questions so that I can get everything on the record about what's happening in that situation.
Okay, that's good advice. And another thing, we talked about being assertive, not aggressive, and I agree with that. What advice do you give people who are recovering people pleasers about being assertive? I think it's difficult because I started this process really wanting that, like you said, the rapport with the teacher, and I'm on the teacher's side. I'm on the public school side. I want everyone to succeed and I want everyone to be supported. And I felt uncomfortable in the beginning, at least, being more assertive, reminding them that they needed to give me progress reports, basic stuff that, over time, when it was noncompliance after noncompliance over noncompliance, then I had no problem being assertive. How do you kind of balance that starting out and all the way through?
I love that you said recovering people pleaser. This will cure you of that really quickly. I think you just have to remember that, it's not. I don't really know how to answer that question. You have to. I usually tell parents when they come to me, you have to make a decision right now. If you want me to get involved, you have to make a decision. Do you want to be that parent, or do you want to just get services outside of the school? Because if you're going to go to the school and really get the services they deserve, you're going to have to be that parent. And so I can help you with that in a way that is not aggressive, but you're still going to end up being that parent. So a lot of parents, a lot of parents choose to say, "Hey, I don't want to be that parent, so I'm just going to get services outside." And there's no wrong answer. It's just however you want to do it. You just If you are just going to go into this meeting and not want to hurt anyone's feelings, not want to make anyone cry, not want to hold anyone accountable, then you are just going to get rolled right over. They're gonna roll right over you, and that's just the way it is. And they might not be doing it on purpose. They might think they're doing the right thing. A lot of teams just don't understand the process and don't really understand the students, their rights, and what they should be getting. So I don't think it's vindictive on the part of the team, but you have to go in and be that parent or not. You have to make a decision.
Mhm.
I do want to say that it's okay. I was going to say this earlier. It's okay in the middle of a meeting to walk out and take a break. If you feel like you're going to cry or scream or yell, take a break. Make sure you take your
Mhm.
recording with you, but take a break and, call somebody or cry in the bathroom and come back, or do whatever you need to do. But just know that you're allowed to do that. And
That's great
meetings,
advice.
sorry, I have so much to say
Yeah.
about this. Meetings don't have to be an hour. So if you're feeling rushed and you're feeling like you are getting anxious because it's feeling so rushed, there's nothing that says it has to be an hour. They never give you enough time for an IEP meeting.
The last meeting we had went 3 hours,
Yep.
and I took a break. My husband and I took a break. It was honestly so exhausting. It just was going around and around and
Yes.
around. it was like deny, dismiss, deny, dismiss. How do you stop that cycle? Like what do you even do? And I'll add on to it. You say in your book to be the most knowledgeable person in the room. Where do you recommend parents, besides your book and your website that has a list of resources, what are the categories or things that parents should be educating themselves so that they can maybe stop that cycle a little bit?
So, usually to stop the cycle of the meeting going around in circles, I just stop the meeting
Mhm.
and just say, well, this isn't going anywhere and we can reschedule this meeting. I'm not going to keep going around in circles. 3 hours is a really long meeting. Definitely been in many of them. And usually it's because we are just going around in circles. But, as I get older, I'm like, no, I definitely don't have time for this. And then to educate yourself, you know, just really find all the programs you can, read everything you can about IDEA as it relates to dyslexia and learning disabilities. So,
Mhm.
you can go, obviously have that book, and then we offer training in special education advocacy. So you can go to Wright's Law. They have a website just full of stuff. You can go to COPA and they have tons of information, but really just look for places where you can make sure that when you do say that they have this right or this is your obligation, that that you're correct.
Mhm. So you said in the beginning that the child will internalize the failure as their fault. And you had that in your book. And I found myself realizing after reading that I have internalized the school's failure as my fault. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels that way. And I know it's sort of a soft emotional question, but you've dealt with a lot of parents, what would you say to parents that are feeling that way?
I love that question. A lot of parents do think it's their fault. Schools kind of make them feel like their fault. I've been to an IEP meeting where they said, well, maybe if you just read to him in the car on the way to school. I'm like, I can't with this.
They always say on the every support person I've got outside supports too are like, "Oh, just do this in the car. Oh, just ask them their arithmetic facts in the car." I'm like, "Do you want me to get in a car accident?
I mean,
Why
seriously,
is it always
it's
in the car?"
ridiculous. Yeah, and maybe I would like to talk to my child in the car and not be
Yeah.
that person that's always talking about reading and math.
Right.
What I would say to parents who are internalizing this as their failure is if you are a parent who's involved in your child's education and you're advocating for them, you're listening to this podcast, you're reading the book, your child is already light years ahead. Your child is already going to be way better than if you weren't there advocating for them. So it's the students who don't have the advocates, who don't have the parents who are involved for no reason. Maybe, maybe they're working a lot. Maybe there could be cultural things. There could be language barriers. There's all kinds of reasons parents don't get involved. But
Mhm.
the fact that you're involved and you're asking questions and you're reading books and you're trying to get the right services means that your child will be okay because they know they're supported. They know they're supported at home. I would make sure that you talk to your child about dyslexia or whatever disability it is they have and make sure that you are letting them know that it's not their fault, that it's not, the end of the world. It'll be okay. We're going to figure it out. You're brilliant and smart, and making sure that they're really involved in things that they're good at. So
Mhm.
I've had parents say, well, we also offer tutoring services, and I'll say, well, I only have Tuesday, Thursday from 3 to 4. And they'll say, oh, well, we have baseball, then I'll just take him out of baseball. I'm like, oh, absolutely not. Under no circumstances will I let you take him out of something he might be really, really good at. So, just as long as you're involved and you're there and you're talking to them about this and they know that you're advocating. You might think you're hiding it, but you're probably not. As all parents, we all think we're hiding things. The kids are seeing all of it. So that's what I really want parents to know, that if you're here
Mhm.
and you're listening to it, then your child is going to be okay. And it's not your fault.
I appreciate that. And it's one of those things where that makes sense when you say it. And I'm sure that's true for everyone else, but it's hard to see it for yourself and for your own
Absolutely. I
child.
mean, when it comes to your child, I mean, every little thing. We've all laid awake at night worrying about our kids.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and I think that's a big part of why I want to do this podcast because there's a lot of, mistakes I feel like I've made or things I've missed, things that I didn't understand, and so that's part of motivation to do this. So appreciate you saying that. I feel like I could talk to you all day about this, and maybe I can have you back to talk
Sure.
about your spelling book.
Sure. That'd be
the
great.
structured word inquiry. I think spelling is a huge topic. I
Talk
really
about
appreciate
spelling all day
you
too.
taking so much of your time to help answer some of these questions for us. So if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you online?
They can go to dyslexiatraininginstitute.org.
All right, Kelli, thank you so much. It's
Thanks
been
for
a
having me.
pleasure. Thanks for joining me today. Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, share it with a friend and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. You can also follow us on social media for more helpful tips and resources at Dyslexia Made Clear.